We only know what we saw, and what we saw goes against everything that we read in the United States. What we do right now, here today, is urge you to stop listening to the people that the U.S. government brings out from the Muslim Brotherhood and from ISIS and all the other terrorist organizations. Stop listening to them and go to Syria. The president of Syria said, bring delegations. See for yourself. That's the answer.
So, members of the U.S. Peace Council paid their way to go to Syria to get the inside scoop from the people of Syria itself. Not just from one side, but from the opposition and the pro-government side. What they come to find out reverberates everything we've been saying here, and it is definitely worth your listen. I want to thank the Positive Side of 2012 for bringing this to my attention and spending the time to crop out the important parts. Now on to the video.
I'm Alfred Martyr, and I'm president of the U.S. Peace Council. The campaign to confuse the American people has been intense. And it is our purpose to try to bring some light, some understanding, which can perhaps lead to the American people demanding an end to the intervention and peace in Syria. We reached out to many peace organizations in our country to try to get a broad delegation to go. I would be less than honest if I did not say that some did not come because they were fearful of going into a war zone. Others demonstrated the confusion that does exist because of reading the propaganda and the barrage of, unfortunately, the media, which gives such a one-sided story. We feel we have that obligation. And it's a tribute to those who went, that they overcame those obstacles and agreed to go, and may I point out, paid their own way.
And we make a distinction between opposition, the political opposition with whom we also met, and the terrorists and the mercenaries with whom we did not meet. We met people in Syria who work nonviolently to bring about change. We learned of their efforts to bring about change, working in opposition to the government, working with the government, but nonviolently. We met with government officials. We met with the Minister of Administration. We met with the Ministry of Health. We met with the Minister of Reconciliation. A whole approach to bringing back those Syrians who have, for one reason or another, joined the mercenaries and the terrorists. And my fellow delegates will speak, I think, about some of the details of these. But I want to give you just an overview of whom we met with. We saw for ourselves the damage that was done to the university. Even while we were there, a shell fell into the School of Architecture, killing students and faculty. And the students themselves were rebuilding the damage. We saw villages that are basically Christian villages that have been besieged by the terrorists but have now been liberated. And the damage done to a shrine in a village called Malula, which is a village where they still speak Aramaic, the language of Jesus, and the attacks on the Christian population. One of the things I bring back, there are two things I want to mention finally that we feel are really important. One is that while the United States would like to divide the Syrians up by religion or within a religion, by the different beliefs within that religion, there wasn't a Syrian we talked to who would accept that. We spoke to the Grand Mufti, and he said, people ask me how many Muslims there are in Syria, and his response is always 23 million. That's the population of Syria. And when we talked to the bishop of one of the Orthodox churches, he answered the same thing. The number of Christians is 23 million. We will not allow ourselves to be divided up the way the United States has divided up the people of Iraq or Libya or Afghanistan or so many other countries. We won't allow that. And that unity, I believe, has led to the ability of the Syrians to withstand an invasion by the most powerful country in the world and its most powerful allies in Europe, its most powerful allies in the Middle East, with what is a vicious attack on the Syrian people. The second is the sanctions. I have to admit that I did not know before I went that the United States has imposed sanctions on Syria in a way that's similar to the sanctions that the United States imposed on Iraq in the 1990s in order to weaken that country and that government that the United States admits killed 500,000 children in Iraq during the 1990s sanctions. That set of sanctions, means that the Syrian people cannot get medicines that they desperately need. They cannot get factory parts that they need to maintain their economy. They can't get infant formula and many other things. Their students cannot go abroad. Their lawyers are separated from the rest of the international legal system because of those sanctions. These sanctions are not reported in the U.S. media, to my knowledge, and we need to know about them. Another way to weaken, these sanctions are another way to weaken the Syrian government and the Syrian state.
My name is Madeline Hoffman. I'm the director of New Jersey Peace Action. I went as an individual representing myself, but I've been a peace activist for 16 years. And I went because I felt that, I went to Syria because I felt that it was important to learn from the Syrian people themselves what was actually happening in Syria, because there has not been enough of or a focused enough response by the peace movement in the United States to what's been going on in Syria. This is not a civil war in Syria. That's probably the first thing we heard, and we heard it over and over again. It is not President Assad against his own people. It is President Assad and the Syrian people all together in unity against outside forces, outside mercenary forces, terror organizations, the names change every day or every other day to try to protect their identity and maybe keep the connection between the country that funded it and that group kind of a little bit more nebulous. But there are groups, mercenary forces supported by Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, the United States, and underneath it, Israel, the state of Israel. And these outside mercenary forces are the ones that are terrorizing the Syrian people and are attempting to divide the Syrian people. I remember when the U.S. invaded Iraq, our organization was against it well before the invasion ever began. But once the invasion was over and the United States was setting up a government, we talked to many Iraqis who said, we're not Sunni and Shia, we're not Sunni, Shia, and Kurds, but the United States is trying to divide us that way. And we got exactly the same message when we were in Syria. We are Syrians, as Henry said before, whether you're Christian, Muslim, or other, you're Syrian, and that's one of the things that's enabled the Assad government to withstand 5+ years of this kind of outside attack. when it was time for the U.S. to unseat Saddam Hussein after years of sanctions and 2 wars, he fell like that. When it was time, the United States decided time for Gaddafi to go, he fell like that. But when it was time, the United States decided it was time for Assad to go, he did not fall. And why? Because he has the support of 23 million Syrian people, and it was more before all these refugees were created and refugees were sent around the world. The whole idea of regime change, the policy of regime change, if you will, it's illegal under international law. The United States has no right to do that. The United States has no right to decide for the Syrian people who their government leaders should be. And so during my time there in Syria, I felt that over and over again. Who are we? Why are we presuming to know what's best for the Syrian people? And the other part of this that I think people in the United States need to know is that the Assad government provides free health care, free universal health care to everyone. It's a mission, it's part of the government's mission. Free education for everyone, from primary school all the way through, even to university and medical school. And we met with one person, when we met with this one particular person from the nonviolent opposition, we asked him, well, tell us, what are some of your grievances with the Assad government? And he said, well, you just heard that it costs about $50 a year for people going to medical school. We think that's too high.